Hi, my name's Ellie Turnock, P number P12220970. In this presentation for my Critical HRM module, I'm going to be critically presenting my views on whether critical thinking is a vital skill for HR managers. The statement initially makes me ask several questions. What is critical thinking? Can it be defined? Is critical thinking a skill? Can critical thinking be taught, and is it really vital? To define what critical thinking is can be a complex matter. The concept of critical thinking is not new and can be traced back to the age of classical Greek philosophy. In more recent literature and research, there is not one definite definition of what it comprises of. The traditional view of critical thinking, as noted by Chaban and Rigg in 2005, states that to be critical is to evaluate what is good and bad and to be concerned with giving reasons for one's beliefs and actions. This can be done through analysing and evaluating one's own and other people's reasoning. Fallaba, 1979, as cited in Snyder and Snyder 2008, describes critical thinking as a process of thinking about thinking. Watson, in 2002, cited by Chaban and Rigg 2005, also states that being critical is with a sense of constantly questioning those ideas and practices that are taken for granted. Although fairly similar in content throughout, the definitions provided do differ. Petress, 1984, page 461, describes critical thinking as examining assumptions, discerning hidden values, evaluating evidence and assessing conclusions. Harris, 1996, page 8, states it is the ability to be open to challenging alternatives. A further definition is that of Natal and Ritchie, 2006, page 272. They say that it is a method that encourages the individual to explore and investigate assumptions and biases. There are numerous definitions available throughout the literature on what critical thinking actually is. I could spend the whole presentation just talking about this issue. From my reading, it seems to me that critical thinking is a process whereby an individual analyses and considers the information at hand and does not take it for what it appears to be at first. Although the definitions are fairly similar, this causes me to question how such a statement of it being vital for HR managers can be put forward. The examples I've given are fairly broad and could be generalised. This is surely going to cause problems for those that want to teach critical thinking and expect it from HR managers. It will mean that ultimately different individuals will attack critical thinking from different viewpoints, which consequently will continue to result in different perceptions and considerations as to what critical thinking is. If there is no agreement as to what critical thinking is, how can it be put forward as a vital skill? For something to be a skill, surely it has to be a definite aspect of something, such as learning to ride a bike. This brings me on to my next question of what defines a skill, and what makes critical thinking a skill? Can skills actually be taught to anyone? There are numerous bodies of research on this. Fitz, 1962, cited in Collin 2010a, distinguished three types of learning: a cognitive stage, where the learner has to understand what is required; an associative stage, where the learner has to establish through practice the stimulus-response links; and the autonomous stage, where the learner defines these multi-patterns of behaviour. This can easily be related to skills such as riding a bike, which I have previously mentioned. You can practice this skill and it is clear once the skill is obtained, but how can this be relevant to critical thinking? How will a HR manager know when they have obtained the critical thinking skill when there is no definite conclusion as to what the skill actually is? How can you become an expert in critical thinking if the apparent experts who discussed critical thinking have not even come to a concise decision as to what it entails? Critical thinking really is a skill, as the statement suggests, and surely using one of these or another similar skill model will enable skill to be developed. Mornix, 2008, noted how critical thinking is not really to do with what we think, but moreover how we think. Consequently, this causes me to question whether critical thinking is in actual fact an innate quality that some people just have. Several researchers draw on this. Bascioni, 1990, as cited in Soff, Marquardt and Hale, 2011, emphasised that critical thinking can indeed be taught, stating that the core critical thinking conditions are analysis, interpretation, self-regulation, inference, explanation and evaluation. However, the author seems to contradict himself and state that there are certain essential elements of a disposition towards critical thinking. This includes being systematic, analytical, open-minded and truth-seeking. This leads me to question whether the implication of this is maybe that critical thinking can be taught, but only to an extent. Surely those with these certain traits are going to be better critical thinkers. Paul and Elders, 2002, as cited in Soff, Marquardt and Hale, 2011, put forward their critical thinking model. It is three parts: elements of reasoning, intellectual standards, and intellectual traits and virtues. Again, there is this idea of traits. If something such as critical thinking is reliant on a trait, how can an absolute skill be taught, especially when, as I've previously suggested, there is little or no complete agreement as to what critical thinking is. Ferret, 1997, as cited in Tao and Ritchie, 2006, also listed characteristics that are consistent with a critical thinker. Included in the characteristics were a sense of curiosity and an interest in finding new solutions. A skill, as previously mentioned, is the ability to do something well and can be taught. How can someone be taught to be curious? Surely this is an innate trait that you either have or don't have. Willingham, 2007, notes that many do consider critical thinking to be a skill that can be employed in all situations. Critical thinking, however, is not this kind of skill, according to Willingham, if a skill at all. It involves domain knowledge and appears to be highly discipline-specific and non-transferable across disciplines. Skills can take much discipline to maintain for extensive practice and learning. Despite the disagreement on what critical thinking is and whether it is a skill or a trait, many of the authors have disagreed with Willingham and found that critical thinking can be obtained through practice. For instance, Dawson, 2000, as cited in Mornick's 2012, found that it can be learnt through a substantial repetition of thinking exercises. Also, Mornick's 2012 note that many studies from the cognitive science mind of thinking find that argument mapping can improve students' critical thinking. This is interesting that studies have found critical thinking to be able to be taught to students. However, with reference to the statement in question, I am looking at critical thinking within a busy organisation, where HR managers may not have the time to sit down and practice mapping their arguments in order to develop their thinking. They might not even have time to fully critically consider something before implementing it. Organisations have aims, goals and jobs to do. How can critical thinking be vital for HR managers when ultimately it can cost them money for training and other costs? Van Gelder, 2005, page 43, states that it is not enough to learn about critical thinking, it must be engaged in. Critical thinking involves risk and may take time. How can this be relevant in a human resource manager's position in a business environment, and how can this be a vital skill for an individual to have? Despite the confusions over the definition of what critical thinking is and whether it's a skill or not, many organisations are now stating the importance of critical thinking in their HR managers. As noted by Whittaker and Johns in 2004, as cited by Collin 2010a, the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development now underpins its professional standards with the concept of a thinking performer who is able to apply a critically thoughtful approach to their job. This can be shown to be true. In a study conducted by Selecki 2013, it was found that the second most common competencies that employees look for in new graduate employees are related to their cognitive skills. This includes analytical thinking, the ability to analyse a situation, and to have an inquiring mind. Again, though, this is looking at students, which causes me to question whether it's really relevant to the vital skills of HR managers directly. Cerny 2005, as cited in Collin 2010b, noted that HR will see a major transformation in the future, with its core becoming more critical and analytical. This is evident, especially with the CIPD noting critical thinking as one of the professional standards. This still does not suggest to me that is vital. Yes, it suggests that critical thinking is desirable, but it does not show me why it will be described as vital. To answer this question, Snyder and Snyder 2008 know that to be effective in the workplace, employees must be able to make effective decisions and think critically. In HR terms, this can be relevant through the selection process. It's important to be critical of the candidate and to consider every aspect of why they will and why they won't be suitable for the role. Ritchie 2014 agrees and states that critical thinking can allow managers to carefully consider evidence to determine what is going to be rational and realistic when developing a strategic plan within the organisation. As Natal and Ritchie 2006, page 272 note, for an organisational change to take place, it must utilise the skill of critical thinking in order to effectively implement successful organisational change. This is ultimately down to the HR manager. Furthermore, there is a lot of research and guidance out there telling managers how to do something. As Carr 2009 notes, it is important that human resource managers are able to recognise the most appropriate method to go about their task at hand. Currently, the most common HR policies and procedures implemented by HR managers are those of universalistic, one-size-fits-all standardisation policies, as Russo and Bowen's 2011 note. So this application of CARS surely does not seem to make sense in order for organisations to really perform to their best potential. In this case, it would seem that analytically considering all options is desirable. However, is it really vital for HR managers? Overall, from looking at the literature, it seems that the mere concept of critical thinking is to believe that there is no truth or reality and to question everything. To me, it seems that critical thinking is not one skill as such, but moreover a combination of skills together that can make somebody a critical thinker. Because of this, it is possibly too much of a generalisation to ask whether critical thinking is a vital skill for HR managers. To ask this question is simply complying with the positivist trail of thought of there being a definite answer. It is contradicting the interpretivist idea of critical thinking. I believe that critical thinking may be a desirable skill and trait for HR managers. It will have its advantages in certain aspects, and it is clear that organisations are starting to recognise this, especially with the CIPD naming it as one of their key professional standards. Personally, I believe a more crucial question to ask is what is the impact of critical thinking on HR policies and its managers, and to look if it is possible to teach critical thinking in an organisational setting. From this, maybe in the future we will be able to determine how much of a vital skill it is.